Hi friends, welcome back to Flourishing Fibers. I'm Sarah, and today I'm so excited to guide you as we create this beautiful mushroom forest and snail paper embroidery pattern together. Look how lovely it turned out. As I make the holes for our stitches with the awl, I wanted to mention that if you're curious about any of the tools I'm using today, including this one, I have links for them in the description box right below this video, so feel free to check those out. And while you're down there, if you're finding this tutorial helpful and you're excited to start this project, please give this video a like. It really helps crafty people find flourishing fibers. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing so you don't miss out on future patterns and tutorials. Alright, before we dive deep into stitching, let's talk a little bit about the order of work. As we go through each element of the pattern, I'll show the recommended stitching sequence on screen to make things super clear. For this mushroom forest and snail pattern, there are two key areas where we want to tackle first. The snail's shell, that's a mouthful, and all the green leaves. The reason for this is that the embroidery techniques used for these parts involve passing your needle and thread underneath some of the previous stitches. By completing these sections first, you'll create a clear foundation and avoid any frustrating snags or difficulties with thread catching on work you've already done. It just makes the whole process smoother. Now, when we get to the mushrooms themselves, there's also a suggested order that can make the following pattern a bit simpler, especially with the details. I generally recommend starting with the gills of each mushroom. This helps define the structure early on and can prevent any confusion as you fill in the other parts. However, while this is my recommendation for the easiest path, it's not a strict deal breaker. If you find a slightly different order for the mushroom sections works better for your stitching style, that's perfectly okay too. The main goal is to enjoy the process. The snail is made up of the reverse chain stitch for the shell, the backstitch for the body, and French knots for the eyes. Please review your pattern instructions for thread count and thread colors. The second element that needs to be stitched are the green leaves. The outlines are in whipped backstitch, the veins are in backstitch, and the center stem and stem stitch. Then we move on to the tall branch. The stem is stem stitch, the short branches are straight stitches, and the leaves are also straight stitches. Next is the berry branch. The stem is stem stitch, the short branches are straight stitches, and the berries are French knots. Now for the yellow branch. The stem is stem stitch, the leaves are detached chain stitches. the mushrooms. Like I mentioned earlier, we start with the gills, which are straight stitches. Then the stems are stem stitches. The cap is also stem stitches, and the scales are French knots. Finally, the stars. Those are all straight stitches. there you have it. Your beautiful mushroom forest and snail paper embroidery panel is all finished and ready to display. I'm so happy how it turned out, and I hope you are too. Thank you so much for joining me today and for choosing to create with Flourishing Fibers. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial and feel proud of your lovely stitched artwork. Just a friendly reminder that you can find the links to purchase this mushroom forest and snail digital pattern directly in the description box below, and you could also find links there for any specific tools or supplies I mentioned throughout the video. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing for more paper embroidery tutorials and new pattern releases. Your support helps me bring more fun projects to our wonderful crafting community. Thanks again for watching. Until next time, happy stitching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.